Are you ready for another fun ride? We're going to talk about blood, or more precisely about the circulatory system that includes blood and the heart and the blood vessels. This is oral number 7. Did you remember to clock in? You need 3 more hours in lab before you take this oral, so make sure you get that in. So what's the bottom line on this oral? Basically, you'll need to know the anatomy of the heart, the types of blood cells, the anatomy of arteries and veins, circulatory differences in the fetus, and the conduction system of the heart. Plus, you'll need to know circulation patterns in the human.
You will show your knowledge of circulation by learning the 17 different tracings of blood, lymph, and fetal circulation. We will ask you 2 different tracings on the oral exam.
Each will be drawn randomly from cards at the instructor's desk, so to be successful,
you'll have to know all 17.
Now this may sound overwhelming, or even impossible, but you will soon see that by knowing the common blood vessels, these tracings will really make sense, and many are simply variations on a theme. Before I help you with the tracings, we need to deal with a few other items of circulation. First, the blood cells themselves. We call these the formed elements because they are produced into the bloodstream. So they're formed and are different from the plasma, which is the liquid of the bloodstream. And also, we can't really call them cells because they're not cells. That is, some of them don't have nuclei, some of the formed elements don't have nuclei, and some are just fragments of much larger cells. So you could call them blood cells, and we often do that, but they're technically not blood cells. So that's why they're called formed elements. So what are the formed elements? Some of this you already know. For example, what are the 3 types of blood cells? Look on page 29 of the objectives
and page 632 to remind yourself of what these elements are.
Notice how you have to know the 5 kinds of leukocytes here.
Turn to page 643 of your textbook
to look at more details of these 5 leukocytes. 3 of the leukocytes are granular. That is, they have clearly visible granules in their cytoplasm. That is, when they're stained with certain dyes. Basophils turn dark with a basic stain or dye. Imagine that, basophil, basic stain. Eosinophils turn dark with eosin. Now eosin is an acid stain. So basophils stain dark with a basic stain. Eosinophils stain dark with an acid stain, an eosin stain. And guess what neutrophils stain dark with? Yes, a stain that has a neutral pH, a neutral stain. Basophils, eosinophils, and neutrophils are all granular. Now there are 2 types of leukocytes that are non-granular. That is, they don't have very large grains when they're stained. They are lymphocytes, and don't confuse that with leukocytes. The 2 L words, lymphocytes are a kind of leukocyte, but they're not the same thing. And monocytes are the other non-granulars. So there are 3 granular and 2 non-granular leukocytes. You need to know these 5 leukocytes. The importance of knowing these leukocytes is that they each do different things in the bloodstream and in the circulatory system. We'll find out more about what they do during lecture and when you take physiology, the follow-up course to this human anatomy class. Let's talk about arteries and veins next. Arteries and veins conduct blood throughout the body. There are 3 fundamental differences between arteries and veins. First, arteries always carry blood away from the heart. So A for artery, A away. Veins conduct blood toward the heart. That's difference number 1. Difference number 2, arteries have a thicker layer called the tunica media than veins do. What is this tunica media? Well, it's one of the 3 layers that make up the wall of the vessels.
Check this out on page 681 of your textbook.
Turn there now. The 3rd fundamental difference is that veins can have valves in them to prevent the backflow of blood. Why don't arteries have valves? Find out. Or you can ask an instructor. I know that you want to say that arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry blood with low oxygen. We say this is deoxygenated blood. But what about the pulmonary arteries and veins? They are opposite of this. So we can't include this as an artery-vein difference. So it is not true that arteries always carry oxygenated blood and veins always carry deoxygenated blood. Because in the pulmonary system, which are those? Well, those are the ones that go to the lungs. So the arteries that go away from the heart to the lungs do not have oxygen yet. They pick up that oxygen at the lungs. And those blood vessels going away from the lungs towards the heart, those are the veins, the pulmonary veins. Those now have picked up oxygen from the lungs, so they are oxygenated. Oxygenated veins and deoxygenated arteries. This occurs in the pulmonary circulation. Now let's look at the heart itself. The heart lies within the thoracic cavity in a space called the mediastinum. Can you say that? Yes, we learned about this one earlier, the mediastinum. The heart is surrounded by a thin cavity called the pericardial cavity. Now I know you want to say that the heart is in the pericardial cavity, but that's not really true. The pericardial cavity is a space between the parietal and visceral pericardium. So the pericardial cavity surrounds the heart. The heart's not within that space called the pericardium. There are 3 layers of the wall of the actual heart.
You can see this on page 654 of your textbook.
They are the epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. Check this out in your textbook. The epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. It makes sense. Epi above, myo means muscle, and endo means inside.